Hello and welcome to today's National FEI Canada webinar titled Planning 101, How to Plan, Budget, and Forecast Like a Pro. My name is Larry Brownoff and I'm an Edmonton chapter member at FEI Canada. We're pleased to have with us today and are delighted to have partnered with Anaplan to bring you what we believe is an extremely timely and informative webinar. I wanted to take a moment to remind you of some of the special programs that FEI Canada offers to our members. The CFO Leadership Beyond Finance program is an unparalleled educational experience that's brought to you by FEI Canada, the Smith School of Business, Robert Half, and Predictive. It consistently exceeds expectation and delivers exceptional results for senior finance leaders' personal careers and their organizations. You can sign up for the program for the next in-residence cohort on the FEI Canada website, www.feicanada.org. A reminder that our first in-person conference since 2019 is happening, and you can register now. This year's FEI Canada annual conference, Peering Over the Horizon, is taking place in person in beautiful Banff, Alberta, from May 31st to June 2nd. This conference continues to be the single most exceptional professional development and networking activity for senior finance executives across Canada. You can sign up on our events calendar, www.feicanada.org/events. By attending the conference, you can earn up to 14 hours of CPD credit. Now, just a few quick notes before today's webinar. I'd like to draw to your attention the question box on the top right of your screen. We encourage everyone to submit questions during the presentation today, and Mark and Leandro are going to do their best to address as many as they can during the presentation. Send your questions at any time. There's no need to wait for the question and answer portion at the end. Now I'd like to introduce today's speakers, Mark Chisam and Leandro Luta. Mark's the Principal Solutions Consultant at Anaplan. Mark has over 25 years of deep functional and technical expertise and thought leadership to help organizations identify and solve their most pressing business challenges by enabling best practices through best-in-class technology. Mark's a professional accountant, a CPA, CMA. Leandro is the Director of Customer Success for Canada and US Northeast at Anaplan. Leandro brings over 16 years CPG experience and has 6 years working in the Anaplan ecosystem. His focus is on data analytics, driven business outcomes, and he's responsible for leading customer success relationships across Canada and assuring customers realize the value of connected planning. Please join me in welcoming Mark and Leandro. And now over to you, Mark, to get today's session started.
Thanks very much, Larry. So I'm going to go. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm just going to start by the title of this session is Planning 101: Learn how to plan, budget, and forecast like a pro. In terms of the agenda, we're going to cover some topics. First being the progression of finance, current planning challenges associated with that progression, how that progression how those challenges require a new approach to planning, how we align strategic, financial, and operational planning to support that new approach, as well as how a planning platform can work better together with existing technology stacks. So let's go ahead and talk about the progression of finance. And again, I'm not going to spend too much time on these slides. I want to get into the demonstration to kind of show you sort of what we're talking about. But essentially, if we think about the progression of finance, things have really over time gotten more complex. So as you can see, beginning way on the left there, it was really constrained to controllership and financial operations activities. But then as time evolved, information needs and increased, as well as complexity increased, and really the need to be more flexible, agile, and responsive has increased as well. And also the number of sort of unstructured requests for information has evolved as well. So that really leads to the situation where we have today, where, you know, finance is really focused on more or less, you know, driving value, but has a myriad of different activities, including things like controllership and financial operations and reporting and business planning, and also data analytics. That progression has led to some challenges in terms of insufficient visibility into drivers and their financial impact, limited ability to create what-if scenarios, a huge proliferation of data sources and point solutions across the business, and also the disconnect between strategy and execution, as well as all of this leading to very time-consuming and resource-intensive activities to address these other gaps. That old approach really consisted of fragmented spreadsheets, working in silos, and really making decisions in isolation. Those challenges, really solving those challenges, really requires a new approach, which is really all about, you know, unified modeling, something that's flexible, collaborative, and scalable, and also traceability and linkages back to all functions, as well as a single source of the planning truth that allows, you know, root cause and remediation, as well as the ability to run analytics rapidly and accurately, and also having linked dependencies, you know, comprehensiveness of plan drivers, and also being able to rapidly create new scenarios as they're required, even on demand. And if we think about, you know, how to support that new approach, you really have to have an organizational alignment, which consists of aligning strategy and execution. And if you think about the, you know, the myriad of operational plans that you see in the bottom section there, where you have, you know, risk modeling, valuations, you know, pricing, and all the sort of other challenges, linking that to financial plans, which include things like revenue and COGS margin, et cetera, OPEX, as well as to that long-term strategy of what is it we want to be several years down the road, which would include things like long-range planning and setting goals and doing situation analysis, as well as integrated business planning. The best practice is to have one platform in which to do all of that. If we think about the, you know, current technology stack that I'm sure many of you are working with, you have at the very bottom your day-to-day operational transactional processing systems, right? ERPs, et cetera. Then you also, you know, have to close the books, so you have, you know, typically some kind of consolidation approach in place. You know, but if I take sort of those two bottom blocks, you know, really what you're talking about is historical, you know, looking back, if you will, you know, what did happen. In order to enable that new approach, what you really need is a planning system of record. And a planning system of record is really not just FP&A, but it's incorporating all of those different use cases that I outlined on the previous slide, one platform to do all of that, which is bringing more people into the planning process, allowing them to collaborate in real time. And the output of that is better planning. Also the ability to do things like analysis of those plans, as well as ultimately being able to make decisions, better decisions. Okay, and that really takes us now into the demonstration. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to introduce you to the Anaplan planning platform. So what you're seeing here is, you know, a landing page. So Anaplan is a pure in the cloud planning platform that allows users to pick the browser of their choice and the device of their choice and go to anaplan.com, and they log in, and there is security credentials associated with their role in the process, as well as their individual security rights. And those two things combine to determine your unique security profile that ultimately determines where you land and where you can go and what you can do once you get there. You're going to see a lot of different dashboards throughout today's demonstration. And dashboards are really the main mechanism through which users interact with the platform. And they're also extremely versatile. Here we have an example of a dashboard that's being used as a landing page, which gives us different links that we can click on, as well as a description of those different activities. And again, your security will determine what links you've got access to. But if I were to click on this first link, establish our corporate plan, we're now going to go into another dashboard that is now focused on really some visualizations of our organizational performance. So on the left here, we have a grid that's a high-level P&L that's looking at quarterly performance, as well as a vertical analysis in terms of percentage of revenue, as well as a grid below that displays some sample key performance indicators, as well as trends in full year net income, as well as trends in operating cash flow, as well as some visuals around different product category performances over time. And then down below is basically just a trend in free cash flow. So on this particular dashboard, you have the ability to also slice into the organization. So in this case here, if I were to click on this little filter at the top, we're looking at North America right now, but we could just as easily switch and pivot and go to, in this case, EMEA, and you can see that everything on the dashboard is just updating in real time as a result of that context. Or we can actually go up a level and pick a more aggregate level of detail. So being able to drill in and out of the organization is, gives you that ability to take a look at the different levels. And again, your security will determine ultimately like what regions or geographies you've got access to. You also have the ability to look at different scenarios of the data. You can see here that we could look at actuals. We could look at our November forecast or our December forecast or even our March forecast, as well as a different what if scenario. And you have the ability just to, select a different scenario and actually pivot your context to whatever it is that you want to look at. So it's really giving you that ability to, first of all, drill in and out of the organization, but also pivot to the type of the type of point of view that you're looking for. You also have the ability to leverage some on-demand analytics capabilities, such as being able to just quickly pivot your information. So in this case here, if I click this little pivot icon in this grid, and let's suppose I want to take my planning geos and I want to pull those down and actually have them outside of my accounts, I've now changed the context of this grid that allows me to look at things a little bit differently. Okay, so that's sort of wanted to just quickly share that with you there. So that's this particular dashboard. Then what we can do is actually move into that strategy part of the demonstration. In this particular case here, what we're going to do is we're actually going to set some organizational strategic objectives and some goals. And on this particular dashboard here, we've got a little bit more of a detailed P&L with access to prior year performance, as well as our current base case long range plan, if you will. And down below is the ability to actually have like different initiatives. In this case here, I'm going to focus on the ability to increase revenue. And if you notice, if I click on a particular initiative, down below are the goals associated with this initiative. And this is really an attempt to quantify the impact of this. So in this case, if I wanted to increase revenue, potentially there's going to be an impact to revenue, and obviously an impact to deliver that revenue on the costing side. And you'll see that you can actually, easily change your goals or even add new goals simply by clicking on a button on the dashboard and defining what you want that new goal to be. And you can easily do that directly on the dashboard. You also can create new initiatives on the fly as well. But we know that strategy is really a mixture of like qualitative and quantitative information. So what you're able to do is also, if you're going to undertake an initiative, you've got to build that business case. So in this case, what you're able to do in Anaplan is really define not only the goal, the measurable goals, but also what it is that we're trying to do, the objective of what it is, the objective of this initiative, what do we do next, how do we track it, who's accountable, what are the costs and benefits of this particular initiative, what is the ROI, the payback, the net present value based on that stream of costs and inflows over time. So you have the ability to build that business case directly within the Anaplan platform. And typically we do, what we see is organizations are doing a lot of this in Excel simply because of the diverse nature of the inputs that to this process. But you can do all that again as part of that planning system of record, one planning platform to really address all the different needs. And what you also can do is activate these initiatives. So in this case, if I want to go after that additional revenue, I can just go ahead and activate it. And what you have at the top now is the discrete impact of that particular initiative. In this case, increased revenue, that's going to add $14 million to the bottom line. That initiative has also now been baked into our sort of initial cut of the long range plan, which we can then use to translate that into operational targets for the rest of the organization when we start planning from the bottom up. Okay, so that's the initiative piece. Now let's take a look at actually planning, operationalizing that strategy. So in this case, what we've got is another dashboard that allows us to actually go after that 12%, and we can go ahead and enter a growth rate here of 12%, and you can immediately see that 12% was applied to prior year sales. Now we've got some reference information like the two-year compounded annual growth rate, what was prior year growth, and what was sales 2 years ago and what it is now. And what we're doing is we're replacing it, basically applying that 12% increase to generate a final target over history. Now the other thing too is, as we sort of make changes to this, and as I'm making changes, you can see that Anaplan is cascading that target down. But what we're also doing is building an audit trail. And in Anaplan, you can right-click on any cell and actually show the complete lineage of that cell. So give me all the changes that occurred over the last 24 hours, and I can see the date and time, the user who made that change, the previous value, the new value, and where that change was made. And again, that's for every single cell within the platform. So if you've got people that are kind of working on the same thing, they'll be able to immediately see why changes have been made to a number that potentially maybe they didn't expect to see changing through that audit trail capability. So I'm going to go ahead and put that 12% back in. And as I sort of click the different geos, you can see that I'm getting a mixture of different regions below. So that's one, what we're doing is basically going down one level to see that 12%, that 618 is made up of the United States, Mexico, and Canada in this case for North America. And you also see that there's been a risk assessment applied and saying, well, the US growth rate is actually understated. So it actually can absorb more than 12%. So what you can actually do is put an override in there and actually at a lower level of detail, actually change that target value. And then you can see that everything else just adjusts proportionally to keep us at that 618. This is an example of being able to plan at any level. And again, that's gives you that increased flexibility and agility to really plan at the level of detail that you would need, that anyone needs within the organization. Because we talk about bringing other people into the planning, other groups within the planning process, they're going to have different data needs, different calculation needs, even different users and different ways that they want to, different planning methodologies that they're going to want to use. An enterprise-wide system planning of record will be able to accommodate those different needs, and then basically aggregate everything up to like some common level of detail for overall analysis and decision making. But that's the sort of being able to plan at different levels. And then also we have the ability to look at the different products that we're planning to as well. So now we're breaking that down to product category. And you can also do things that holds and overrides as well. So maybe I wanted to override product category 2 to 136 million. 135 million, I can do that. And everything else has just been adjusted proportionally, but I'm still being held to that original target of 477 million. Now, annual targets are great, but what about when we start doing our planning, potentially we're planning on a more granular level. Well, Anaplan can then take that target and break it down to a monthly basis on using different seasonalization methods. So in this case here, we're looking at prior year spreads. We can also look at straight line spreads, so it's the same number every month. Or potentially we could do something custom. So to do something custom, we can click on this link and basically from here, put in 100% and have that break back across time, which is basically 8.3% per month. But then perhaps for this particular product, maybe we want to have a little bit of a bump in October, November, and December. And then what you can do then is go back and readjust to 100%, and now you have that sort of seasonal bump that you're looking for. Then we go back to the dashboard, the previous dashboard. What we can do then is immediately implement that new custom spread and immediately see how Anaplan has automatically applied that, into our spreading methodology. So again, flexibility, agility, and being able to do that at speed is key to a best-in-class planning system of record. Okay, so where are we going next? So let's continue moving forward. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to go back one step to our previous dashboard. And you'll also notice that there is an alert on this dashboard that is a capacity alert. So it's great to want to increase revenue by 12%, but do you have the necessary capacity in place to deliver that increase? So now let's take a look at further operationalizing this by looking at people. And you'll see right now that on this particular dashboard, what we've got is our target is way up here. This is where our target has put us. This is our current capacity, and we have a pretty substantial gap. And we're also monitoring things like our revenue target, our cost of our workforce, some key indicators like revenue per employee and revenue per total headcount. And we also are looking at different different inputs around things like attrition, the cost of hiring. If we did add new people, would they be 100% productive out of the gate, or would they be more of like a ramping profile? And also too, what are we paying these people depending on what their role is? So we have a mix of different levers that we can pull to see how we want to address this particular gap. Well, first might be, putting in some kind of productivity adjustment. So maybe if we, change sort of how we work, we might be able to, to increase productivity by 10%. But as you can see, it really only gets us part of the way there. So now we have to really look at, well, okay, so we need to hire some people to deliver this 12%. And maybe we start with our most senior people. So maybe we start with 4 senior people right off the bat, and you can see that closes the gap substantially because they're a lot more experienced and can ramp quicker. Maybe we also need to bring in 5 mid-level people, and as you can see, we narrow that gap quite a bit. And then maybe we need to bring in 6 junior people to fully close that gap. And as you can see, we end up with a slight gap in Q4, but we end up quite a bit ahead in the earlier quarters. So now, really the decisions and you can immediately see also that our workforce costs have gone up quite a bit, our ratios have changed. And again, will that trigger any further alerts, because maybe we're monitoring thresholds to understand, okay, well, we can't really go below a certain ratio. But you can see here that in order to close that gap, we actually have to hire 15 new people. And this is the kind of conversation that a best-in-class planning system record will enable you to do. You're talking about assumptions and decisions rather than spending your time, cranking through the numbers and numerous spreadsheets and so on. You're able to kind of elevate that conversation and talk about the decision making. Okay, so that's sort of what's in front of us, and that's that strategic aspect. Now, what about that more operational aspect, and how do we link back to strategy? Well, now what we're going to do is we're going to look at more of a bottom-up example for planning. So I'm just going to go to this example here, and if we're talking about people, let's start there. So first off is the ability to kind of look at the status of where everybody is in the process. So what you've got is an illustration of the current workflow status. You can also see here, and I'll drill down a little bit a level here, and I can immediately see who's in, what's in progress, what the target is, what the current forecast is, what the variance is, and the current, and whether any of these plans have currently been submitted for review and so on. You also have the ability to establish a planning calendar and really break a body of work down into much more granular detail. And when you've got turnover in finance and new people coming on board, they don't necessarily understand the process. You can actually have task-based workflow, within the planning solution to understand, like, what do you have to do, who owns it, when is it due, what's its current status, etc. So then, just very quickly here, let's go ahead and do a little bit of planning from that bottom up and link back to that execution. So in this case here, let's go ahead and salaries and benefits. And on this particular dashboard here, what we've got is our existing workforce for our particular cost center. And I've got, as that cost center owner, line of sight into what my share of that overall target is. So I know right now that I've got people that I need to hire, hence that 15 people across the organization. I get 1.37 million of that. So now I can hire people up to that point. So now, how do I go ahead and do that? Well, first of all, we can collect the existing workforce complement from HRIS systems, into the planning platform, see some different attributes about them, like what's their role, age, education level, tenure, any kind of attributes about your employees you can track as well. But you can also go in and add new people. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new person just by clicking on a button on the dashboard, and immediately see, that I've got now like one new placeholder for this new hire. And down below, I have sort of that blank row that's been added. And if I click on them, I can see down below I have no kind of like headcount type of calculations or anything. But in this case here, let's go ahead and select a new role for this person. So, they need to be, I'm going to start hiring that junior level AE because we needed like 6 of them. So here's the first one, and we can actually put in a start date for them. You'll notice that I'm going to click into the cell. Not only do I have like guardrails of what I can pick from, but I also have things that help me out, like pop-up calendars and so on, where I can go ahead and say, you know what, I want to hire this person, let's say September of 2021. And just by doing that, I can immediately see that down below, I've got all of my calculations associated with what the salary is, all of the ancillary benefits and so on. As well is I also have the ability to say, you know what, I want to flex the start date. I'm going to start them halfway through the month. And you can see that in this case, Anaplan has automatically prorated the calculation accordingly. So it's very much like month, day, year type based calculations. You can also, if you decided you wanted to make a person a contractor, you can easily do that. And what Anaplan does is it grosses up their salary because we're not paying them any benefits. As well, you can see that this headcount has been automatically approved. But if I decide that I want to kind of go outside the lines a little bit and put in an override to their salary, maybe I want to pay them $100,000 because they're a superstar or what have you, I can do that. But you'll notice that the calculations disappear because that headcount has no longer been approved because I've exceeded the midpoint of their salary from that, from that grid of, well, for this role, the midpoint of that salary based on external like Radford data or what have you is 85,000. You're deciding 100,000. That requires an exception to approve. Okay, so then we can sort of go ahead and continue on this process. Then I can decide to go ahead and submit my plan, and then go back to that previous dashboard. And now what we've got is we've got salaries and benefits that are currently being reviewed. Our salary workflow has changed to pending review, and now we can continue on in our planning process. And just one thing I wanted to point out is if we go into like G&A planning for an example and decide in this example, and you can see that this is a completely different planning methodology, but a single platform where we can say, you know what, I want to go into a 2%, I want to do a 2% increase to software maintenance over the prior year. Here's my current year budget. And I can decide if I want to spread this, let's say on a quarterly basis. You can pick your different spreads, and you can even put in, this is my, explanation for this planning assumption. What Anaplan does is it automatically spreads those costs quarterly as part of the forecast. And also what you've got is visibility into the calculations that are driving it. So why is this 344? Well, I can right click on this and actually do a drill down. And what Anaplan does is it actually exposes the business logic. So in this case here, I can see that, if we're not using a detailed forecast, what we're going to be doing is using prior year actuals times 1 plus the year-over-year growth percentage. And, if many of you, all of you are, used to working in Excel. In Excel, you're using like cell, absolute and relative cell references, which can be difficult to trace and understand. But in Anaplan, what you do is you give just the names to things that you want to call them in terms of the calculations, and what gets displayed is those names, the calculation formula, as well as the inputs to that. So, and this is again full self-service, right? So you can actually start drilling down into increasing levels of detail and being able to drill down, even be able to see, okay, well, here's what those previous year expenses have been made up of, and just continue drilling on a self-service basis. And really what this does is it alleviates finance from being a bottleneck in the process, because people are always contacting them, trying to understand how things are being calculated. Well, in Anaplan, they can do it themselves. Okay, so that's that piece. And then if we talk about a little bit about collaboration, which again is another aspect of those best-in-class planning platforms, is really about bringing people together with completely different perspectives. If we think about sales, right? And again, we've gone through that top-down target setting process. And if we think about the sales organization, how they're going to achieve that 12%, well, they're really concerned about CRM level information, like what accounts do they have in their pipeline? What's the current status of the accounts? What's going to close this quarter? What's going to push? What could potentially pull in? They're dealing with their decision making is kind of really being done at the account level, which again, completely different data needs. But again, being a best-in-class planning platform, you can have them in the solution with the data that they need, so that they can make the decisions from their point of view to help achieve that 12% increase in revenue. So we've got CRM level or customer level or account level information available within the platform. We can also then look at aligning our sales and finance targets simply by loading those sales targets and immediately seeing, here's the finance perspective. The finance perspective is looking at things from a geographic perspective, and we can also drill in and out of and take a look at, like in this case, all of our different products, and we can see that for the Americas we're like 1.8 billion. But what sales looks at is really the product breakdown of that, and seeing, okay, well, of that 1.8 billion, here's how these different products have to perform. And now sales can take the baton as part of their role in the process and go and start doing things like territory and quota setting, where they can actually do assignments to regions and sub-regions and even down to the field account executives, where you can put in an over assignment, right, which is basically a buffer. You can immediately see, okay, here's my, as an RVP, here's my regional target, here's the sub-region target, and here's ultimately, the final target. And then being able to then start setting their territories and quotas, again, aligned and on exactly the same page as finance, so that there is that single source of the planning truth. And then ultimately they can take it down, to incentive compensation planning, where they can look at their comp plans, they can look at and run scenarios on those comp plans, see how people are being compensated from an accelerator perspective, and say, well, if we increase our incentives, maybe we want to increase our accelerators to like 1.2x, right? Well, we can see that that's potentially going to cost us a bit more in commission. And then if we start, continuing to sort of, change our incentive plan, we can immediately see by improving our accelerators, we're actually going to generate more sales than what it costs us to service the increase in plans. And also too, it puts more people under that payout curve, instead of having, some people getting paid nothing and only a very few getting paid a lot. And so it allows you to kind of fit more people under that curve. But then compensation plan modeling is something that can be done within a planning system of record. Okay, so now if we think about planning with flexibility, is the ability to run things like scenarios. So here's an example of a scenario here where we're looking at, in this case, a dashboard that has like pricing assumptions. It's got the ability to do things like initiate hiring freezes. We've got some salary drivers. We've got a high-level P&L. We've also got a balance sheet, and we've got a cash flow all together. And we also have some key metrics around earnings per share targets. So what if we encounter some headwinds, right? The last 2 years, I'm sure no one would argue that that was a huge headwind, right? Maybe more like a typhoon. But in this case, what if benefit costs suddenly go through the, health insurance costs go through the roof? Well, that's going to put us in an unfavorable position. And notice that I'm running this scenario on a what if version. Well, okay, so, and what if we, to start countering that, maybe we introduce a hiring freeze of about 6 months. So what will that do to our numbers? And you can see that we're still missing our earnings per share target. What if we now wanted to start looking at pricing of our different products? And notice, as I scroll down, what you'll see is that as I, let's say I put in like a 20% price increase as an example, and I want to then make this a percentage as opposed to an absolute dollar override, you'll notice that as I select growth rate, the numbers in our, in the balance sheet as well as the cash flow are also updating in real time. So best in class, planning system of records have connected financials together. So as we're running these different scenarios, we can immediately see what the balance sheet, cash flow, and P&L impacts, as well as the impacts on key metrics, are doing in real time. And so now we need to continue our price increases. So what if we need to introduce another price increase? Maybe this one's going to be 30%. So we go ahead and do that, and we can see that we're starting to shift things in our favor. All of our financials are updating in real time, and we can even look at potentially increasing, the number of units. So in this case here, maybe we need to do like 130,000 units. I can easily do that, and by doing that, you can see that by increasing our volume and in doing some price increases, which you could argue some of those maybe are counterintuitive, but we've actually beat our earnings per share, and maybe just for an additional buffer, we can try to increase our inventory turns and immediately see what the impact on that is as well. But again, what you're able to do is this integrated scenario analysis in real time to understand the decisions that you have to make, the levers that you have to pull in order to achieve certain targets.
Mark,
then if we talk about planning.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, one of the questions is how would you use Anaplan for like a multi-campus university or multi-agency government entity. So I know in some of the previous dashboards you showed the hierarchy of North America, Asia, Europe, that would relate. But as you go through, maybe if you can just annotate that and speak to the hierarchies and how that would work across agencies or campuses, things like that.
Yeah, and that's a great question. Thanks, Lisandro. Now there's, I see a couple of different ways, right? One is, you put everybody into a hierarchy. And so if you think about like different agencies would be sort of members of that hierarchy, where each agency would have access to their member of that hierarchy, and they're just part of an overall hierarchy. So maybe they only see their aspect, but they're also being aggregated up so that someone can come in from a higher level view and see kind of how everything rolls up. But I would envision sort of each agency having sort of their own member of that hierarchy, and then even within, even have their own completely different modeling capability, modeling and data calculation requirements as well. So even though you're sort of part of one model, you can have your own unique data requirements, your own way of calculating and planning methodologies, all within that single platform. The other thing, Anaplan can also be deployed in a multi-model approach as well, so that potentially each agency could have their own unique Anaplan model, where they essentially have their own, they're able to kind of do that, sort of own it on their own. But then ultimately, you'd have like more of like a consolidating model, which would gather the inputs from all the agencies to provide that aggregate view. So there's a variety of ways of having like servicing multiple agency needs within the platform. Okay, and feel free to interrupt me for any further questions as well. Happy to take those. That's why we're here. So this is just a quick example. And then if we think about planning with agility, is the ability to make changes on the fly as you need them, right? So how many times have people been in the boardroom and they get this what if question? It's like, I can't answer it right now. I got to get back to you because I'm in a spreadsheet world and it's going to take a few days. Well, in a best-in-class planning platform, it's owned by the business users, which means that they can take the same skills that they use to work in Excel and apply those to the platform and actually create new calculations from scratch. Here's an example. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into we're going to do we're going to take a look at sort of this revenue plan here, and here's an example where using Anaplan, you can pick a revenue center, pick a profit center, pick a product, and here's where you can plan for FY21 using and again growth rates. So maybe you can see that down below in this grid we have our selling price, which is that 159. If I put in a 10% pricing adjustment, you can see that automatically Anaplan applies that 10% price increase, and it also remodels revenue and ultimately margin as well. And you also have the ability to go to like a full year and say, well, okay, right now we're at this amount of units. What if we want to go ahead and change this to like 3,000? Take that number and just break it back over time, and you can see that Anaplan just remodels the downstream impacts of that. But you're in the boardroom, you're in the meeting, you're modeling out these scenarios to say, well, it really would be nice to know what our gross margin percent is. Well, I don't see gross margin percent on here. So how would you respond to that? Well, using Anaplan, what you can do is, first of all, let's take a look at the name of the module. So right now it's wholesale revenue forecast. And now we're going to put our Anaplan model builder hat on, and we're actually going to go into what we call the model settings, and we're going to click on something called modules. Think of a module in Anaplan as an Excel workbook in the cloud, which is like rows. You decide what rows you want, what columns, what pages you want, or different dimensions, and what calculations you want. And we're going to just do a quick search on wholesale. And so there's our wholesale revenue forecast. We're going to go ahead and open that up, and here's this module in sort of how it would be presented to the user when it's published to the dashboard. You can see that we don't have a gross margin percent, but what we can do is go ahead and add one. So just click on the little design icon. Then what we can do is decide where we want to add it. So let's go ahead and add it like right below gross margin. So I'm just going to select that row. I'm going to click on the plus sign, and I'm just going to call this one gross margin percent. And I'm going to go ahead and put that before that line that I highlighted. So now it's going to appear right below gross margin, but I want it to be formatted very similar, right? So I'm just going to select that same formatting, and you can see that now it's going to be bold, and it's actually going to be justified to the left. And this is going to be a number, but it's actually not going to be a real like a whole number. It's actually going to be a percentage. So let's go ahead and change the format of this. So it's going to be a number, but we're going to call it a percentage. And maybe what we want to do is display like one decimal place. So we'll go ahead and we'll change the format of this. Also too, it wouldn't make much sense to add your percentages over time. So what you have the ability to do is decide how you want this to behave over time. So let's make it add up as like an average. So we'll go ahead and select that sort of summary behavior, if you will. Now, if we go back to our view, you can see that we don't have any gross margin calculations because we have to define that calculation. And what you have at the top is something that Excel users would be familiar with, which is basically the formula bar. And here's where you can, just like Excel, double click on the formula bar, put Anaplan in formula mode, and then here's where you can point and click to create that formula. So really, gross margin percent is going to be gross margin. The only thing I have to type is that dividing sign, and you can see that what Anaplan's doing is it's actually completing that calculation for me. And then when I hit enter, I now have my gross margin percent calculation fully working. So then when we go back to the dashboard and I just refresh, you'll notice that gross margin percent doesn't show up. And so what we can do, and that's because you can just like Excel, you can choose to hide and show certain rows. So now what we can do is put our dashboard designer hat on and see how flexible these dashboards are, where you can actually drag on like text and grids and charts and point and click your way to creating a new dashboard from scratch or modify an existing one if you've got security rights. But ultimately what we want to do is we want to open up this module here. And what we're going to do now is go into our hide and show. So just like Excel, we can hide and show our line items. You can see the gross margins there. We just have to go ahead and turn it on to display it. And now you can see that it's showing up for us. Then we go ahead and republish our grid. And now what we have is basically a change that can be done, a requested on-demand change that can be added in a minute. And so best-in-class planning solutions have that ability to be owned by the business users and to be able to respond with agility and speed to any changes that might occur in your business and new information requests as well. Okay, and I know we're getting close to time here, so just one other thing I wanted to share with you is that being able to plan like a pro is also being able to leverage the best-in-class capabilities at your disposal. So let's talk about that for a second. So here's an example here where I'm just going to scroll, and this is an insurance example where we want to plan like we want to plan premiums for travel insurance. And the traditional way of doing so was basically planning almost like in a funnel, which is basically applying assumptions around like what's our conversion rate, because we're going out and trying to get new business. That business may not those leads may not translate into actual signed policies. So what's our conversion rate? What kind of adjustments do we want to make on our year over year to amount of volumes and so on? And then really what you start off is basically in a funnel where you basically have like your quote volume. That quote gets translated, it gets converted to actual qualified leads and so on. Then ultimately you end up with a certain amount of policies, new written policies, and then there's premiums applied to that where you end up with, okay, here's our new policy revenue. This is very much a driver-based approach, like you saw me do in the previous example, where it's like units times volumes. But what if you could introduce more science into this process? Well, very quickly here, let's go ahead and take a look at some machine learning capabilities within the platform. And really where it starts is looking at history. And you can see there's a lot of like crests and troughs if you look at that history. And what Anaplan does is it brings something called PlanIQ to the table, which is basically a native integration to Amazon Forecast. So now what you've got is, instead of having to rely on the IT organization or a data science team to help you with those algorithms, you can actually, as a business user, have access to those algorithms directly from within Anaplan. And what Anaplan does is you feed in that history, you feed in the external data that you want to trace, you want to try and correlate with that history to try to predict and get a forecast. And what Anaplan does is it starts backtracking against that history. So here's the first algorithm. You can see that it's not really responsive. It's very historical based. It's very flat. And what Anaplan does is it stacks and ranks these algorithms based on your definition of forecasting accuracy. In this case, we're using mean absolute percentage error, but you could use any other metrics that you decide for forecasting accuracy. And what Anaplan does is it ranks those algorithms. And again, it's all doing this like basically as part of that forecasting run. I'm just breaking it up for you. So, and then it tests the next algorithm, scores the first one, tests the next one, scores the second one, okay, scores this one. Then it goes on to the next algorithm, starts scoring that. You can see there's a bit more correlation here, scores this one. Then we move on to the next algorithm. Then it starts scoring this one. And you can see, okay, there's a bit more behavior here. So this one might be ranked sort of first so far. And then we move on to the next algorithm. And you can see here that maybe there's a bit stronger correlation here, specifically if you look at that, sort of that decline and sort of that rise afterwards. So there's a little bit more of correlation here. And you can also tag events. So what also you're able to do is specify like your tolerance for upper and lower bounds for confidence intervals. And then anything outside of those confidence intervals gets tagged as an outlier. And so you can tag those outliers with reason codes. So one of them might be a COVID lockdown. How historically, here was our COVID lockdown. How did this algorithm behave? And you can see that it kind of picked up that declining trend. What about post-lockdown, that post-lockdown surge? Well, maybe not so much, because obviously if people are moving out of lockdown, they're going to travel more. And then what about currency impacts? Like what if there's a drop in a certain currency? Did the algorithm pick that up? And then based on all of these events and ranking and stacking the different algorithms, Anaplan makes a recommendation. And then what it does is it applies that algorithm to generate an auto forecast based on that. And then you're also able to kind of test that forecast by layering in potentially new forecasted lockdowns that might occur in the future. Also that post-lockdown surge, as well as potentially other currency events that might be happening, to give yourself that level of comfort that, yeah, you know what, as a planner, I'm good at approving this forecast for production use. And then what happens is you're now, as a planner, let's go back to this previous dashboard, you're now able to activate this algorithm. And by doing that, what you'll see is that Anaplan will automatically generate the new premium volumes, as well as complete our forecasting curve. And this is a fully automated forecasting process using machine learning with backtesting against history to figure out the best algorithm for each combination, and then it generates that forecast for you automatically. So planning like a pro means leveraging the best-in-class tools available, getting everybody into the platform, working together and collaborating, and having alignment between strategy and operational execution. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'm just going to go back to the PowerPoint slide. And here was our demonstration agenda, so I'll just quickly move through this. And now I'd like to turn it over to Leandro for the remainder.
Thanks, Mark. So I've been noting some of the questions in the chat. I think I'm be able to address them all, but first, Mark, if you, sorry to put you on the spot, if you can just flick on your camera quickly. Anaplan versus Excel was one of the questions, and I think you're going to answer that more eloquently than I will. I can reference quickly that in our Anaplan community, if you're a model builder, you can actually go into the community and search for an Excel formula and find the equivalent in Anaplan. But Mark, I think, can you just quick 1-2 minutes on Anaplan versus Excel?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, Anaplan strikes a nice balance between familiarity and improvement. So familiarity meaning that Anaplan formula bar. Familiarity also meaning that Anaplan, as Leandro just pointed out, Anaplan has a function library. Excel has a function library, and Anaplan has reconciled its functions one-for-one with their Excel equivalents. So as Leandro said, you can go in and do a search on SUMIF or whatever would be your Excel function, and the equivalent function within Anaplan would be cross-referenced there. So you've got a lot of familiarity, but you also have a lot of state-of-the-art improvements. And in many cases, what we've done is we've improved on those capabilities. So there is no SUMIF function within Anaplan because you don't need it, because you have hierarchies in Anaplan. So you basically that sum occurs automatically and aggregates automatically through the hierarchies, and so you don't need to do a SUMIF. You don't need to do VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP in Anaplan. You just need to do lookup. But so there is the improvements, but there's also that familiarity, because there is still a lookup function, and it's done very similar to to Excel.
Thanks. And then I know there's some questions about IT resourcing and I guess in general Anaplan talent. Are there adequate number of folks out there? Does it require how much programming? I'll cover some of that here quickly in a slide or two. I think yes, we have time. So quickly, my name is Leandro Luta, Customer Success Director for Anaplan. Prior to joining Anaplan, I was a customer. I purchased Anaplan not for finance, although my FP&A team loved my outputs. I purchased it for commercial planning, so trade promotion, account, how much we were paying brokers, all that side of the commercial analytics side. The role of customer success at Anaplan, or any sort of planning platform solution that you would look at, I would hope, is to help our customers realize the value that they set out through the evaluation process. Nobody makes an investment into a planning platform without trying to drive value into their own business. We want to memorialize that and hold ourselves accountable to that with you. So once a planning platform is chosen, our goal is to enable that value. And at Anaplan, I would assign somebody from my team. We call them business partners here. Some other vendors might call them customer success managers. And they essentially assigned to help navigate and ensure that you get the guidance and resources that you need to meet those goals. Mark, next slide, please. Thanks. So at Anaplan, again, we have that business partner that is assigned directly to your business. As Mark mentioned a couple of times during his presentation, the intent of Anaplan is to be business owned. Can it be, and do some companies have it IT owned? Yes, that's a preference every company can make. But the vast majority of our customers, the tool is business owned. So in order to support that, we have an academy that has a defined path, and that'll be in the next slide. And then also we have our customer care, so 24/7, 365, email, chat, or phone call. And then on the customer experience side, we are constantly asking our customers for feedback on our platform. So Anaplan as a tool started off as a finance tool, and our customers took us with gathering their feedback, took us into supply chain and sales planning and anything planning across the enterprise now. Mark, next slide, please. So there was questions in the chat about resources and IT resources. Again, IT can definitely build up these skills, but so can any financial analyst that has good Excel skills. Starts with a level one training. Level 2, Anaplan Way is our implementation methodology, and I'll go into that in a little bit. And that makes you a certified model builder. As far as level of effort, as far as hours of training, between level 1, level 2, and Anaplan Way to become a certified model builder, you're looking at 1632. Oh, I should have done this math before. 60, I believe it's 32 hours for level 1, 16 for level 2, and 12 for Anaplan Way. So somebody that's dedicated can finish it in a couple of weeks, or it can be dragged out over time. These trainings are available online, on demand, or in person. Now, for your more advanced model builders, somebody who's going to start to architect solutions, not just change formulas and do assigned work, if you will, somebody who's going to architect a solution, we have the more advanced coursework following level 3, and then following that, the ultimate status is a master Anaplanner. And to be a master Anaplanner, obviously you have to complete the entire learning path, but there's also components to advocate and help other people develop their Anaplan skill. Their work is peer reviewed, so their models, model schemas, all that will be peer reviewed, and it's it's very difficult to earn. But Mark, next slide, please. The reality is that we can't flip a switch to build that talent. It is a deliberate effort. You need intention, and you need time and resource to get there. But there is a maturity curve, and for the customers that do build up that muscle within their organization, there's massive returns, because now they're iterating not only on the solution that they started with, but they're tangentially adding to it and adding value to an existing use case. Next slide, please, Mark. So these next couple slides are the rubber hitting the road, and these will be very similar across all software vendors, but as an ideally business-owned tool, there is more focus on the development of skill, building up your own center of excellence. But it all starts with vision and goal setting, being truthful with yourselves as customers or potential customers about your ability to change, about your data readiness, coming in with eyes open, aligning leadership and assigning the team that's going to drive the project, and then the rest is pretty standard across all platforms. You do your project planning, get into your implementation. In Anaplan, we use our own agile inspired methodology. Then you launch, go live, use the tool, gather feedback from your users, keep iterating, and get into that business as usual method. Sorry. Mark, next slide, please. So as mentioned, the Anaplan way methodology, it's an agile inspired Anaplan way of doing things. Pre-release is more that project planning from the previous slide. Foundations is where we measure twice, cut once. Gather all the user stories about how and what people need to do in the platform. Define the calculations, things of that nature. Do all your model builder training upfront, and then you get into your implementation. And usually it's 2 or 3 week sprints. Depending on the complexity of the project, you could have 3, 4, 5, 6 sprints, and you iterate through your build. Get into a testing phase. So now you've got real data in the system, you've got all your dashboards completed, and you go through your testing. Once you've debugged anything that needed to, you deploy. Next slide, please. There was a question about, are there adequate number of people trained? The question is yes, but it's an ongoing chase. Anaplan keeps growing. We keep adding new customers, and with that comes the need to continuously develop talent. To support our customer base, especially in those first implementations, we have a robust partner network. Regional partners are, think of them as smaller geographic boutique firms. Most of them would implement only Anaplan. That would be the crux of their entire practice. And then our global alliances, the Deloitte, Accenture, PwCs of the world, all have practices spanning the globe. From a technology side, we have partnerships with AWS, Google, DocuSign, Salesforce, all sorts of different tools that can plug and play into Anaplan. And with that, 1 minute left, I will wrap up. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mark and Leandro. Your insight on planning 101, learning how to plan, budget, and forecast like a pro. On behalf of the members and guests, we really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and expertise. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank our members, guests, speakers, sponsors, partners for their support to our guests attending. There'll be a quick, short online survey following in an email following the webinar. We really appreciate it if you take some time provide some feedback. I know Andrea has also put into the chat some contact information for Leandro and other individuals at Anaplan. If you have specific questions, Leandro was saying, he's more than open to dealing with those one-on-one. So again, thank you everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.